So my name is Riley. I am a developer advocate here at Gadget. Today I'm going to walk through building just a simple translator app that uses our built-in OpenAI connection. I'll walk through some of the stuff you get when you build with Gadget and some of our AI specific, and maybe touch on some of our auth stuff a little bit as well. So I haven't prepared any slides. I just want to get into the app build and start building, and I will kind of explain as I go. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the webinar chat, or else there is a Q&A section that looks here on Zoom. So feel free to ask any questions, and I will try to keep an eye on it as I'm going. I'll make sure to go through everything at the end. So without any further delay, I am just going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, perfect. So this is Gadget. You can start a new app if you haven't done it before, gadget.new. So if you haven't built a Gadget app before, Gadget is a full stack app development platform. So you can build it handles your database backend using Node.js and front end, which is a React front end powered by Vite. It's all live and hosted on the internet. So that is the difference compared to when you're doing local development. There's no deployment step. It's a one-click deploy because you're developing on the same infrastructure that you are running your production apps on. So you are developing live on the internet, and it really simplifies deployment. You get a lot of out-of-the-box goodies. I'm going to walk through those during this webinar. So I'm going to go and start creating a new app. I am going to build an AI-powered translator app. It's a nice little example that uses our OpenAI connection. So I'll just start by creating a new app. I'm going to select the AI app template, give it a domain name. I'll just call it my translator demo. Perfect. And get started. And so whenever I create my new Gadget app, as I said before, it is handling the full stack of your application. So I now have a Postgres database that is powering my app. I have a Node.js backend environment that I can use for all of my backend logic. I'm also going to have my front end powered by Vite, and it's going to be a React front end. You don't have to work in React. We actually do have a template on our main website that uses Vue. So anything that works with Vite, whether that's React, Vue, or Svelte, you can go nuts. You can build your front end in those other languages. We suggest React because we have a bunch of handy tools that work well with React. But you can, if you want to work with something else, you can. So as you saw, I now have this live app URL. So I just create a new app. I get a template kind of right out of the box, which is fantastic. So this is a live app right here. It's my development environment. You can see -- development in my URL is already built in. So when I select the web app or AI app kind of starter template, I do get an app out of the box. This is going to be full stack. So I can log in. I'm using Gadget managed credentials, so I don't have to go through the Google Cloud Console and get everything set up from the first step. I can just log in. I get to the signed in screen. And because I chose the AI app template, I actually get a little chat GPT sample. So I can be like, hello, how are you? And get whatever the basic chat GPT response is. Doesn't have feelings, but is here to help. How can he assist? So right out of the box, you get this full setup of database, backend, front end. This is the front end you can play with. Auth is built in. Let's iterate from here. So I'm going to build my translator on top of all this. Going back to the editor. So there's a couple things that we just walked through there. Because I used auth, we actually already have user and session models. So that's going to be pre-populated for you. Models in Gadget are like tables in your database. So I have a user table, for example, and a session table. And this is what allowed me to log in and will record any of my logins. So if I actually go to my user data before looking at the fields, I can see that, yeah, Riley at gadget.dev, I did log in, I have an ID. So I am now a user on this system. So it's automatically set up out of the box for me. My user model also has a bunch of fields. So fields in Gadget are like columns in your database. So, first name, last name, email, password. These are all different fields that are stored in my user model. Finally, rows of your database in Gadget are records. So there's one record for me, my user. It's very easy to add your own data models to Gadget. So I'm going to start to build my translation app. I'm just going to add a new model called translation. click enter. And just like that, I have a new model. So this is like a new table in a database. I have some default fields that we automatically create for you. Easy to add new fields. Once again, this is like adding new columns. So I can add an input field. It is by default a string. I think that is fine for now. You can always set default values or have custom validations that you either write yourself. So if you want to add code to validate fields, if I only want my input to be, you know, all caps or something like that, I can write a code snippet that enforces that. For now, I'm just going to choose the pre-built validation that is required. So every single translation record will require an input field. I can go ahead and add output as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to record all of the translations I make. So whatever I pass in and whatever comes out, that'll be recorded in input and output. I'm also going to leave output as a string field. And then I'll add a user field. So as I said, we have this user model that records whoever is logged in. So I'm actually going to add a relationship that relates my translation record to the user who actually made the translation. So translation belongs to my user model, and then I have to select the inverse of the relationship. So user has many translation. We want our users to be able to have, multiple translations, not just make one and then you're done. So we can select the has many. So you'll see I have this user field on my translation model. And if I actually go to my user, I see this inverse translations. So user has many translation. So that's a just very quick way that you can do data modeling. I don't have to touch Postgres myself. I don't have to look up any Postgres commands. It's all just handled for me. Now, when I created my new data model, I also got something else out of the box. As you can see, there's this actions section up top, create, update, delete. So whenever you create a new model in Gadget, you get an auto-generated CRUD GraphQL API. So that's CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. So these are the default kind of scaffolding I get for my actions. It will work as is right now, but I can also go in and add some code to these code files to customize my default CRUD actions. I can also add new actions if I want. So for example, if I'm writing a blog application and I want to a publishing workflow, I can go create an action and call it publish and just make it very publish specific instead of using the general update action. So in my translation model, how I want this to work is whenever I create a new translation, that'll be like, hey, I'm sending in some input text. I want to translate it. I want to make my call to OpenAI, send a prompt so that my input is properly translated. So I'm going to go ahead here. I'm going to add a couple parameters that I'll need. I'm going to add one called connections, and I'll also add a session parameter. Now I am going to start here. I'm going to call the built-in OpenAI connection. So you can see autocomplete works in the Gadget editor. There's OpenAI.chat.completion. So once you get to the OpenAI point, you're really just using the OpenAI node package, official OpenAI node package. So if you're looking for API documentation, it's all right here. But all we're doing is we've baked in this node package so that you can make requests right within Gadget. You'll notice that there was no setup involved. I didn't have to set up my connection or enter any OpenAI credentials. That's because whenever you start building an OpenAI app with Gadget, team, as defined by Gadget, gets $50 of free OpenAI credit. So I don't have to go through that setup step. I can just kind of start building. This is actually a create here. We do have a question. Yes, I will share the recording at the end of the webinar, definitely. It will be emailed out to everyone. So thank you for asking. So I have my connections.openai.chat completions create. I can pass in some parameters. So I want to select my OpenAI model. There we go, turbo. I'm just going to copy and paste the messages that I send in. I've already got them pre-written here. So all I'm sending in is, you're a helpful language translator. Please translate the following into French. Right now, I'm just hard coding French as a language. And then I'm taking my input from my record. So in this action file, Gadget runs off the action framework. We have this run and this onSuccess function. So the run function is a great place to modify records before they are saved to the database. You see we have this save record. So this incoming parameter, the incoming parameters are applied to our record, which will be saved to the database. So the record is our new row. And the incoming parameters will be, for example, our input text. So because I've already applied the parameters to my record, I can just pass record.input into ChatGPT as a prompt. Another question here. Oh, okay. I've already answered that one. We're good. Perfect. So now I want to take this response here and I can grab or set record.output. So this will be my translated output response.choices. And this is once again just the OpenAI response format and content. Perfect. So this will now, it'll send a request to OpenAI. It'll send this prompt, get a translation, return it, and we'll set it to our output on our new record. There's one more thing I want to do in here. I do want to set the user. So if there's no user on my record as it comes in, I think this can just be user here. Perfect. So if our incoming record doesn't have a user already associated with it, I can actually use this session parameter to pull the current active user. So if you are signed in, you'll have that user ID number. I'm going to grab that from my session and link it to my new translation record. So I can go record.user equals link. And then we're calling that session, checking to make sure it exists, get, and user. So the reason I'm checking if the session exists will be because if I make a request using the GraphQL or API Playground, there won't necessarily be a user unless I pass one in already. So I'm going to show you how we can actually just test this action now. I'm going to click the Run Action button. My GraphQL mutation is already populated, so I don't actually have to touch that section at all. I just need to input my variables. So I can set an input, which is just a string I want to translate. Hello, my name is Riley. And if I go ahead and run this, this is actually going to run my action. So I see that we do have a new translation record. The input was saved as hello, my name is Riley. The output is bonjour, je m'appelle Riley. And we're good. If I go check my database here, I can see, yep, it was saved properly. This is the case where there is no user because I didn't actually pass in my user ID. That's A-okay for now, but it's something we'll want to fix when we actually build the front end of our app. So this is now my action. This is whenever I create a new translation record, it's going to make this request to OpenAI, get the translation back, store it in the database. So that's fantastic. Now what we need to do is expose this to our front end. So as I said before, when we created this new app, we did set up our front end. We walked through it. I'm going to walk through the front end structure a little bit here. You'll notice that all the code files are down here in the File Explorer. These same files you get when you're working with your actions. So like my translation create action is also available here. So you can go right to the code file if you want. There's our OpenAI request. We also have a front end folder. So as I said before, our front ends are powered by Vite. So there's a Vite config. It is currently set up to use React, but like I said, if you want to use Vue or Svelte, feel free. There's a package.json. So because this is a node project, I can add any dependencies that I want to. And there's an index.html, which is kind of the entry point for your front end. So in the front end folder, we have a main JSX. This is kind of where React is set up and initialized. API.js is an important file. You shouldn't have to touch it most of the time, but it does set up an API client. This allows us to actually call our Gadget backend. So our translation, create, update, delete, and read functions are part of our app's API, and we can use this API.js client to actually call that API from our front end project. Then there's an app.jsx. This actually defines our default router here. It does come with some of our handy auth tools. So you can see we have like signed in or redirect, different components, a use sign out hook. So I do encourage you to go look at our Gadget Inc. React package because there are lots of useful handlers. I'm not going to go too much into the auth stuff today, but there is a bunch of nice little goodies there that make implementing auth and securing routes on the front end and back end very easy. Of course, there's an app CSS file. I'm not going to talk about this at all because it is just CSS. And then we have our routes file or folder. And routes has our index and signed in pages. And if I just go back to our app, this is signed in. If I sign out, this is our index page. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start to make some changes to our front end. I'm going to just copy paste some code into the signed in route. I'm not going to touch our index route at all. I'm just going to plop a bunch of code in here. And then I will also update my app CSS. And if I go back to my app, so you'll notice it changed. There's a bit of wonky CSS in there maybe, but our front ends do have hot module reloading. So you don't actually have to refresh your browser. It's very much like when you're working in local development, which is nice. So this is the front end code. I just pasted in here in my signed in route. Most of the front end, almost all the front end, it's normal React. There's nothing really special about any of the components being returned. There is some interesting stuff at the top here. So you'll notice that I am importing my API client that is defined in API.js here. And I'm also importing a use action hook from the Gadget Inc. React package. So this is really the interesting block in this file. This is where I'm defining my use action hook. And the use action hook allows you to call this api.translation.create, so our create action, in a very reactive way. So this gives us two parameters as a return. We have the first one here, which we have destructured right now, which returns data. So that's going to be any sort of data that's returned as a result of you running this action. So for example, that will be our translated text. We have fetching, which is a Boolean. So you can use this to display a loading state, for example. And then we have error. Error isn't used in this example, but if you do encounter an error running this action, you will get it returned and you can use it to display a message to your users. That's the first parameter. The second one is actually just this translate function. And you can see down here in our use callback, we're actually calling translate with some input, which we've just set up as React state up here. And that is actually what's going to call this api.translation.create action for us. So when we call handle translate, which is part of our form submission, it will make this API request and call our action. So let's go ahead and test it out. Hello, my name is Riley. Translate. Looks right. Okay, perfect. So this is a quick AI translator. I'm going to iterate on this now. This app, you can see it's hard coded to French, which maybe isn't ideal. So let's change that up next. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my data model. It's super simple to edit your model. So I'm going to add a new field called language. And this will be a target language. I can set a default value for French. So by default, my translation will translate into French, but it'll also give me a way to supply my own language so I can translate into something else other than French. I am then going to go into my create action and I will update this accordingly. So right now we have French hard coded. Instead, I am going to do this and go record dot language. So autocomplete works. So now I'm passing in my custom language to my prompt to be sent to OpenAI. And finally, I'm going to go to signed in here. And I can modify my front end to also accept a custom language. So this will just be an input tag. Right now, it's just a label. I'll go inputs. Let's close this off here. The value, I guess what I need is to define some more React state first. So I'll just go ahead and copy this. Language, set language. Perfect. And then the value will be equal to just language. And then I can add an onChange handler. And that will just be take the event. And I will call set language with e.target.value. This value. Okay, perfect. I also need to pass language into my translate call. Otherwise, it will just default to French every time. We can actually test this out. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page. There is a timeout on the HMR, so I think it's 3 minutes right now. So if you don't develop on your front end, you do have to refresh the page. If I go, hello, my name is Riley, I don't enter a language, it should default to French there. So perfect. So we know our default value is working at least. Let's allow for a little more dynamic language selection. Pass this in here. Perfect. So now if I go ahead and say, hello, my name is Riley. Let's go Spanish. You can translate. Hola, mi nombre es Riley. Perfect. Okay, so that's working as expected. You can choose whatever language you want here, get creative. That adds a little more dynamism to our app. If we go check our app records here, translation data model, I can see that, yes, the language is now being saved as well. So that's fantastic. You'll notice that the user is also being correctly stored now that I'm making requests from my front end and I have that user record. So that's another advantage of using our built-in React hooks, is that all that session data is going to be managed for you automatically. It makes for a nice experience when you're using auth and logins. So that's nice. You'll notice if we go to our front end, it's not the best experience still. You click translate and it takes a while and then it just dumps some text on you. And if I pull a longer sentence, that takes a while to translate. Let's try this. So you can be waiting for a little while. That can get a little annoying. So I'm going to iterate on this again so that I actually stream my response. So how, if you're using ChatGPT, it takes a while and streams the whole response to you like it's responding as if it was speaking. We're going to go ahead and implement that next. So in order to do that, I'm going to use HTTP routes in Gadget. So if I click on my routes folder in the nav here, I have this post chat route. So it's already set up. And when I first started building and we had that little chat GPT box at the bottom of our signed in page, this is actually the route that was powering that request. So it is sending a response. It's using the same OpenAI connection we used in the translate create action, but it's going to go ahead and set this stream flag to true. So the response will be streamed. And then we have this OpenAI response stream helper, which is part of our Gadget server package, and it helps you respond with a stream. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to find our translation create action. I'm just going to go ahead and steal this little call, plop it in here. I'll call this stream instead. And then I will go ahead and add a stream parameter, true. I think that's good. I can get rid of this. Awesome. I can also modify this so that we are getting input and language will be our inputs to our HTTP route. And now it is no longer associated with a record, so I can remove that. So this is one of the very good use cases for using HTTP routes in Gadget. Normally, I would always recommend you use a global action when you're not using a model action. So Gadget has 3 ways to kind of call your backend. There are model actions, which are great when you're manipulating a single record in a single model. So that is like when we're making our translation. Global actions are for more general API. So if you are doing some sort of statistics-based or analytics-based app, you want to pull some analytics from a bunch of different data models, put them together in a response and return them. I suggest using global actions for that kind of API. HTTP routes are kind of an escape hatch. So if it's something you can't really do with a global action, use a route. The routes are great for streaming responses from OpenAI. That is like one rock solid use case. You can also use HTTP routes to subscribe to webhooks from other services. So we actually have a tutorial. You can go check it out. It subscribes to a webhook from GitHub using a route. So those are really the 2 good use cases for using routes in Gadget. So now that I've set up my backend route, I want to call it from my front end. So I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to use another hook here instead of use action. It's called use fetch. So normally if I were calling an HTTP route on another service, I would just use, Axios or Got or just the built-in fetch. I'm going to use the hook because once again, I get all the nice built-in goodies that comes with session management when I use the Gadget hook. So I've just pasted this code. Watching me type it all out is probably pretty boring. Comment out our old use action. So now I have this use fetch hook. It's calling the chat endpoint, and all of the arguments, parameters here, return values, sorry, are the same. So I still get my data, my fetching, and my error, and I still get a translate function that I can use to actually call my route. You can see that the parameters of the use fetch are a little different. It is just like the fetch parameters you would get. So you can pass in the method, the body, any sort of headers. And I'm setting stream to a string. So it is expecting a streamed response. So that is great. So that will now allow me to, whenever I call translate here, it will call this route instead of my action. And then I'm just going to go ahead. This value needs to change just to translation, I think is what it is. Yes, translation. Okay, so now let's check this out. Copy this, refresh the page. Let's go Spanish again. And there we go. So we can see it was streamed out instead of just loading, waiting for everything to be done translated, and then returning that block. So that's kind of nice. There is one issue with the way that I have built things, though. You'll notice if I go to my translation model and check my data viewer, I don't actually have that record, right? This is the exact same record. Let's do this in French so we can see the difference. So there we go. Response was streamed. If I refresh my data viewer, you see there's no French language response for this input and output. So we're not actually saving to our data model anymore. We're literally just using our HTTP route to call to OpenAI and return the stream. So I still want a way to be able to save my chats to my database. And I can go back to my route. And as part of this OpenAI response stream, I can pass in another parameter, onComplete. And then I'm going to go ahead and define a function here that allows me to save my response to my database. So I'm going to go onComplete. We get some output. So that will be my entire translated text. And then I can go void api.translation.create. And I'm just going to pass in all of the variables I need or all the parameters I need to create a translation record. So this will include the output. I will also add the user here, link, and I do need to add my session parameter again. So user. Perfect. Okay, so that should be all we need. Now, onComplete is being passed into our response stream. So every time the translation is actually complete, it should be saved to my database. I'm going to go ahead. I will just refresh the page one more time. Let's go pick another line to translate here. There we go. Beautiful. Copy this. Paste it in. Let's choose another language. Klingon. Translate. Oh, that didn't work super well. Oh, there we go. Translated Klingon. So OpenAI is now giving me a before and after response, which is interesting. That's just what's coming back from the prompt. Well, normally, I'm not going to try reading this, but it looks correct. I don't speak Klingon, but I imagine it's correct. We try another language that maybe I'm more familiar with. I'm not really that great at Spanish, so I'm assuming it's correct as well. Anyways, it is translating our text for us. So that's fantastic. That's really our development app. I can be very happy with this app. Now, maybe I want to deploy it to production. So if I'm finished building here, deploying is really easy. And this is really one of the big advantages to building on the internet. I have this deploy button down in the bottom right. Now it does give me this warning. So limitations applied to Gadget's OpenAI keys. So I haven't actually gone to the connections page yet. So before deploy, I am going to show that off. If I click on connections, this is where if you're building a Shopify app, you can go ahead and connect to Shopify. We see that the OpenAI connection is already created for us. You can also set up a Sentry connection if you want to be alerted when your prod app is having issues or running into exceptions. It's very helpful. But let's go ahead and check out this OpenAI connection. So you can see that API keys right now are Gadget keys. So that is the Gadget $50 credit is being used to call OpenAI. Before you deploy to production, you probably want to sign up for OpenAI, pay for your own account, pay for some API keys, and you can go ahead and click this edit button, use your own API keys, and then you can either enter your development API key as well as your production API key and confirm to save. I'm not going to do that right now, but this is how you would go about doing that before you deploy. I'm just going to go ahead and deploy anyway. So what this will do is this will take my, all of my app assets. You do get a separate environment, separate database when you're working in production. It bundles and minifies all of your front end assets, stores in our highly available CDN. So there we go. We have deployed to production. So you'll notice if I go back to the homepage now, instead of just a development URL, I have my production URL. It is active and ready to go. So I can go ahead and click on my prod URL. Looks the same. That is good. Let's go ahead and sign in. Let's try it again. Hello, my name is Riley. We can do Klingon again. Looks good to me. Let's try something else. French. Bonjour, je m'appelle Riley. I know that one is right. So that's fantastic. Our translator is now working in production. It took me just a couple seconds to deploy, a couple clicks. If I go back again to my app and look at the data, so this is all my development database data. If I click up here, go to production, I can now see my actual production data. So that's fantastic. Same thing with user. This is my production user and my development user. So you do get that separation. You can look at both instances of your database. And note that the unique IDs are shared between instances. So this has ID 2, whereas this is ID 1. So just something to make note of if you're expecting sequential individually between both databases. Okay, so that was the AI translator app build. It was pretty quick. We have lots of time for questions. I did see that we have another question in the Q&A. Where do you find the methods docs available for a specific Gadget server module? Yes, that is a wonderful question. So I will just go to docs.gadget.dev. So guides are all kind of our general guides if you're looking to learn about the framework. API at the top here is your specific app API. I'm actually going to just close this. I'm going to open the guide for my project. There we go, API. So I can see that this is my app specific API. So if I go to translation, like this is my translation model, this gives me samples for, finding and retrieving, filtering and searching records, etc. The actual packages that I'm importing are all as part of this reference section. So there's Gadget Inked React, which is a lot of our React hooks and tools. This is why we recommend you use React, because we kind of have all these packages to help you call your API. And then down here, there's a bunch of like use user, use auth. So a bunch of our authentication helpers and components as well. There's Gadget Server, which is some of our server tooling. We use that when we streamed our response back in our route, the OpenAI helper. There's auth. Right now, auth, the key part is it helps you protect HTTP routes. You will notice if I go back to the app, in the routes folder, there's this auth plugin here, and we are using Gadget Managed Credentials. So you do want to remove this flag before you deploy to production as well if you are including auth in your app. And there are these two environment variables you'll want to set up. If you go to settings and environment variables, that's kind of the entry point there. You do need to go through a Google Auth setup. We are coming out with just email password auth soon, so you don't need to go through the whole Google setup. So keep an eye out for that as well. But yes, to answer the question, the reference section is where you're finding methods and docs available for some of these server modules. Perfect. Yes. If you do need to ask questions, that's all the questions we have for now. There is a Q&A button in the Zoom call. Feel free to enter your question. I'm going to go ahead and just click those ones as done there. I'll wait around for a few more minutes if anyone else has questions. Other than that, that was our app build. Thanks so much for joining me. I will be emailing out a recording of this build. Are you planning on to conduct sessions for Shopify apps? Yes, definitely. So I think how I'm going to try and do this is do 1 or 2 webinars a month and I'll probably alternate between an AI or web app and a Shopify app. I will maybe talk a little bit about some of the use cases for this translator app here. So, if we are working within Shopify, you can kind of use a lot of this code to offer a chat bot, like a multilingual chat bot. So we do have a tutorial. Actually, have a AI product recommender. Oh yeah. So if I open up this app, hoping it still works. So we actually do have a chatbot tutorial that allows you to ask questions about products in a Shopify store. So, do you have any backpacks? And this similarly sends it to OpenAI, responds with a stream, and then comes back with product suggestions. So if you wanted to offer support in multiple languages, you could actually create your vector embeddings. So Gadget does support native vector databases or vector fields natively. You can actually create vector embeddings using the OpenAI connection for all of your products. And then whatever chat the user enters, just send it to OpenAI, translate it to English first, and then you can use that English translation to pull out the most similar products. So that is maybe like a Shopify-esque use case you could use for this language translator. Outside of Shopify, customer support help, a little chatbot is a kind of easy answer. People can ask you questions in whatever language, send it to OpenAI, get a translation back, and then you are golden and you can interface that way. Maybe there's a way to detect the language that was actually sent in so that you can respond in that language as well. So there's a lot that can be done with this little translation app and the boilerplate code. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, can you embed this chat on a Shopify theme extension? I'm not positive, to be perfectly honest. I will have to go talk to Antoine, our solutions engineer, and get a bit of info from him. I'm assuming you can do something like this in Shopify. I know there are Shopify widgets. I'm not too sure if you can do it with a theme extension or if it has to be baked right into the liquid, but I imagine you certainly can do something like this. I would have to check though. I will get back to you, Ryan. Can you please share some code repo to refer regarding Shopify app? I would like to explore more regarding Shopify. For sure. So in terms of this app right here, if you go to our docs, tutorials, Shopify, AI product recommendation chatbot, you can go through all the steps to actually build this app. You can also just click this fork button and you get all the code available here. So it's kind of all the actions, the product models and such. All of that will just be given to you for free and you can kind of iterate as you want. So if you just want to look at the code, go ahead and hit the fork button and you'll get a copy that you can look at and play with. Okay. I'll hang out for another minute or two for any more questions. Okay. I think I will call her there. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. The recording of this webinar will be sent out to you. It'll also be available on YouTube, hopefully by the end of the day. So if you do want to revisit anything, you can go check it out there. Also, feel free to reach out on our Discord. I am available on there pretty much anytime. So I am happy to answer any questions you might have about this webinar, Gadget, Shopify. If I don't know it, I can probably find someone at this company who does. So thanks again for joining, and I hope to see you all next time. Cheers.